The first encounter. Zoria stood silently in the shadows, watching the strange world of Earth unfold before her. She was an alien, a traveler from a distant planet, and she had landed on this unfamiliar world with one simple goal: avoid humans at all costs. Stories of their violence, their greed, and their chaotic nature had filled her mind ever since she was a child. Humans, she believed, were dangerous creatures, and she had no interest in becoming involved with them. She had read the reports, heard the whispers, and seen the destruction they caused in the galaxy. Earth was no different from the other worlds tainted by their presence. From her hiding place behind a tall building, she could see the busy streets of the city. People hurried from place to place, their faces filled with worry or fear. Zoria didn't understand why anyone would want to be around such chaos. She preferred to keep her distance. There was no reason to interact with these creatures. Humans, she thought, had nothing of value to offer. But something caught her attention. A young girl, no older than 16, was helping an elderly man cross the street. The old man moved slowly, leaning on a walking stick, clearly struggling to make it across the busy road. The girl, wearing simple clothes and a warm smile, gently took the man's arm. She didn't seem to care about the danger around them. Cars sped past, but the girl's focus was entirely on the elderly man. She guided him carefully, watching out for every step he took. Zoria felt a strange emotion stir inside her. She wasn't sure what it was, but it made her pause. For the first time, she saw something in a human that she hadn't expected: compassion. The girl didn't stop to look around at the traffic. She didn't seem to care about the chaos of the world. All that mattered to her was the old man beside her. The girl helped him across the street, her face filled with patience and kindness. When they reached the other side, she waved at him, smiling as he slowly shuffled away, grateful for her help. Zoria couldn't believe her eyes. This wasn't the kind of behavior she had heard about. Humans, who were supposed to be ruthless and selfish, were capable of such a simple act of kindness. Zoria's mind raced. Could it be that everything she had been taught about humans was wrong? She continued to watch the girl, who now went on with her day, walking down the street without giving any attention to the world around her. Zoria could sense the girl's calm, steady energy, so different from the hustle and bustle of the city. There was no hurry, no rush, just a peaceful presence as she moved through the chaos. Zoria's mind started to swirl with thoughts. She had been told that humans were violent, that they hurt each other for their own benefit. She had been warned to stay away from them, to never trust them. But the girl's actions didn't match the stories. Could it be that humans were capable of good? Zoria didn't know what to make of it. She had spent her entire life avoiding humans, convinced they were a threat to everything she knew. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. No, she had to stick to her plan. The stories couldn't be wrong. She couldn't afford to be fooled by one act of kindness. Zoria knew that humans were unpredictable. One good act didn't mean they were all kind. She had to remain cautious. But despite her instincts, the question lingered. Could humans be different than what she had been taught? Zoria decided to watch more closely, to learn more. If she was going to avoid them, she had to understand them better. As she moved through the city, Zoria kept her distance, watching the people around her. Her eyes followed the girl from a distance, noticing how she interacted with others. The girl smiled at a street vendor, offering him a few coins for a small snack. She exchanged friendly words with him, and Zoria could see the warmth in her eyes. The vendor smiled back, grateful for her kindness. Zoria was confused. This wasn't what she had expected. The stories she had heard about humans painted them as cold and cruel, but here she was, witnessing something completely different. The girl wasn't just kind to the elderly man. She was kind to everyone. She treated people with respect, as if they all deserved her attention and care. Zoria watched in silence, trying to understand. She had seen so much hatred and violence on other worlds. Wars, destruction, suffering. But here, on Earth, the humans she observed didn't seem to want that. They seemed to want peace, to help one another, to care. A part of Zoria couldn't accept it. Her training told her to stay away from them. Humans were dangerous. But another part of her was drawn to what she saw. Could this girl, and perhaps others like her, be the exception? Could humans be more than the monsters her people believed them to be? Zoria took a deep breath and made a decision. She would continue watching. She would observe more humans, trying to find the truth for herself. But one thing was clear: Earth and the people on it were far more complicated than she had ever imagined. And the question of whether humans were truly dangerous or capable of something more was one she couldn't ignore. The more she watched, the more uncertain she became. Could humans be worth understanding after all? The seeds of doubt. Zoria's mind was a whirlwind as she moved through the city. Her eyes followed the young girl as she disappeared into the crowd. That simple act of kindness, guiding an elderly man across the street, had left an unexpected mark on her. How could something so small challenge everything she had been taught about humans? It didn't make sense. The alien knew she needed answers. She couldn't let a fleeting moment of compassion cloud her judgment. She had come to Earth with a mission: to observe, to stay hidden, and to learn the truth about humanity. But now, for the first time, she felt the weight of uncertainty. Could everything she had heard about humans be a lie? Or was there something more, something deeper, that she hadn't yet understood? Zoria wandered deeper into the city, careful to keep her distance. She knew she was different, her presence barely noticeable in the busy streets. She blended into the shadows, a silent observer. Her ship, hidden far from human reach, would remain untouched while she investigated further. She was determined to keep her mission intact, but now, the thought of leaving Earth seemed distant. There was so much more she needed to see. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Zoria spotted something unexpected again. A group of people huddled together outside a small cafe, laughing and talking like old friends. They didn't look like warriors or thieves. They weren't the ruthless people she had been warned about. These were humans, but something about them made Zoria pause. One of the men in the group, dressed in old clothes, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle of notes. He handed them to a woman standing next to him, who looked surprised. "You need this more than I do," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. Zoria's gaze narrowed. The woman looked at the money in disbelief, but the man's gesture wasn't a one-time thing. He was smiling, urging her to take it. His face wasn't hardened by greed or selfishness. It was filled with something Zoria couldn't place, an emotion that didn't match the stories she'd heard about humans. The woman hesitated, but then accepted the money. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Thank you." Zoria felt something stir inside her. This wasn't the image of humanity she had expected. These humans weren't plotting war or causing chaos. They were giving, sharing with each other without expecting anything in return. Still, Zoria's training was hard to shake. Her mission was clear: avoid, observe, and remain distant. Yet, as she continued to watch, a troubling thought began to creep into her mind. Was this the human nature they had spoken of? The selflessness hidden beneath their flaws? Was it possible that beneath the violence and destruction, there was goodness? The girl, the elderly man, the young man helping the woman. Zoria had seen examples of kindness she couldn't explain. These humans, whom she had once feared, seemed to be driven by something different. But was it enough to change her mind? Could their acts of compassion outweigh the darkness she had been taught to expect? Zoria didn't have an answer. Feeling an urge she couldn't ignore, Zoria made a decision. She would try to see more, to watch as many humans as she could. She had seen snippets of humanity's kindness, but she needed more to understand. Could humans be the dangerous creatures she had been led to believe? Or was there something more complex at play here? Something worth discovering. Zoria followed a group of humans into the heart of the city, her eyes never leaving them. She saw how they interacted with one another, helping the elderly, comforting the sad, sharing food with those in need. She saw people giving up their seats for the tired, offering smiles and kind words. There was laughter in the air, a genuine sense of connection that seemed impossible for a species known for its violence. It was as if these humans carried hope, even in a world that seemed full of chaos. Zoria's doubts grew with each passing moment. If humans were truly as dangerous as she had been taught, then why did they help each other? Why did they go out of their way to make the world a little better, even in the smallest of ways? It didn't fit. She couldn't ignore what she had seen. Humans were not just monsters. They were something more. But what that more was, she couldn't yet figure out. They were complicated, unpredictable. She had to learn more, she realized. She had to keep observing, to dig deeper. But as Zoria walked through the city's crowded streets, a sense of something bigger began to take root inside her. She felt a pull, something she couldn't explain. Her mission was still important, but so was understanding humanity. She had to know the truth. She couldn't leave Earth with just fragments of her experience. With that, she made a decision. She would not just watch anymore. She would start interacting with these humans, just a little. She needed to understand them more, no longer from the shadows, but up close. There was something in her that knew she had crossed a threshold, and she couldn't turn back. Zoria wasn't sure what she would find next, but she felt certain of one thing. Humans were not the one-dimensional monsters she had been taught about. There was more to them, much more, and she had to know what it was. The heart of the city. Zoria had seen enough from the shadows. Her mind had begun to shift, but the truth still eluded her. She needed to dive deeper into the human experience. No longer content to watch from a distance, Zoria decided to venture into the heart of the city. She needed to understand these humans up close, beyond the surface of their fleeting kindness. As dusk settled over the city, the streets buzzed with the energy of human life. Zoria walked among them, blending into the crowd, her form almost invisible to the busy pedestrians around her. The sounds of traffic, conversations, and laughter filled the air. But there was something different tonight, something unsettling that made Zoria's instincts stir. The city was changing. The bright lights of the shops, the neon signs, and the music from the streets gave way to an eerie sense of tension. Zoria's heightened senses picked up on the subtle shifts, a low rumble of voices, hurried footsteps, and the uneasy energy that seemed to pulse through the crowd. She followed the whispers, her eyes narrowing as she moved deeper into the heart of the city. Her curiosity pushed her forward. It wasn't just about observing kindness anymore. Something darker was unfolding, and Zoria was determined to understand it. The crowd parted as a group of men entered the scene. They were dressed in black, their faces covered with masks. Zoria felt a sudden surge of adrenaline. These men weren't ordinary civilians. They were trouble. She could sense their hostility, their intent. They moved quickly, purposefully, like wolves hunting prey. Without hesitation, they grabbed a woman from the crowd. Zoria's heart skipped a beat as she saw the terrified look on the woman's face. The men surrounded her, shouting threats. The woman struggled, but she was outnumbered, her voice drowned by the growing noise. Zoria instinctively took a step forward, but something held her back. Her mission was to stay hidden, to observe, to understand. But the sight of the woman's fear stirred something within her. Was this the violence humans were known for? The men began pushing the woman around, and the crowd seemed to shrink away, unsure how to respond. It was chaos. In that moment, Zoria's training came into play. She knew she had the power to stop this. She could end it in seconds. But should she? Was this her place? Was this what she had come to understand about humanity? The answer came from an unexpected source. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was no more than 5 feet away from the group of men. His clothes were simple, his hands empty, yet there was a determination in his eyes. Zoria watched as he took a deep breath and addressed the aggressors. "Let her go," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't what you want." The men laughed, mocking him. But the man didn't flinch. His stance was steady, unafraid. Zoria felt a strange respect for him. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't carrying any weapons. He was simply a man standing up against cruelty, despite the odds. The leader of the group sneered at him. "You think you can stop us? You're nothing." Zoria could sense the rising tension, the dangerous energy building in the air. The man's words didn't have the power to stop the gang, but his courage had sparked something in the crowd. Others were starting to notice, slowly stepping forward, murmuring amongst themselves. One by one, other humans joined him. A woman stepped forward, then a teenager, and a middle-aged man. Each person, despite their size or strength, stood beside the man who had spoken first. Together, they formed a human barrier between the gang and the terrified woman. Zoria's eyes widened in disbelief. These humans, who had just moments before been minding their own business, were now showing a bravery Zoria had never expected. They were not the cold, selfish beings she had been taught to fear. They were something more. The gang members faltered. They had not expected resistance, let alone a community of strangers coming together to protect one another. The leader of the group shouted in frustration, but it was clear the balance was tipping. The crowd, now united in their purpose, didn't back down. Zoria felt a surge of emotion she had not anticipated. A part of her, the part that had always viewed humans as dangerous and chaotic, struggled to reconcile this new reality. The humans before her were standing up against injustice, even when it wasn't their fight. Was this what humanity truly was? Not just violence, but courage and unity in the face of darkness. The gang members, realizing they were outnumbered, finally retreated, leaving the woman unharmed. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices filled with relief. Zoria stood still, her thoughts racing. She had witnessed something remarkable. She could hear the woman's voice trembling as she thanked the man who had first stepped forward. "You saved my life," she whispered, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you." The man, a stranger to her, smiled softly and nodded. "I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Zoria felt the weight of his words, a truth she had never considered before. She had watched these humans come together, not out of obligation, but out of a shared sense of compassion. There was strength in their unity, something far beyond the violence she had expected. These humans, flawed as they were, had the capacity for something greater than she could have imagined. They had the power to rise above fear and fight for what was right. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Zoria lingered. She realized that her journey had just taken a new turn. The darkness she had once believed to be the heart of humanity was now mingled with light. She had only scratched the surface, and now she knew humans were more than she could have ever anticipated. And she couldn't turn away from them now. The saving act. Zoria couldn't shake the feeling that her entire perception of humanity had been turned upside down. The events from the night before still echoed in her mind. Those brave souls who had stood up against the gang, who had fought to protect a complete stranger without hesitation. It was a testament to something deeper in humans, something that defied her expectations. But even after witnessing such courage, Zoria couldn't quite let go of the uneasy feeling deep inside her. After all, the world wasn't always as it seemed, and one act of kindness didn't erase the darkness that she still believed lurked in the hearts of humans. The next day, Zoria decided to test her theory further. She had spent weeks observing from the shadows, but this time, she would push herself into the heart of the city. She had learned to blend in well, moving unseen through the crowd, unnoticed by the very beings she had once feared. Today, however, she would break her own rule. Her gaze settled on a street corner, where she saw a group of people gathered around. In the center of the group stood the same young girl, the one who had helped the elderly man across the street in the first place. Zoria had kept an eye on her, intrigued by her constant acts of kindness. The girl was chatting with a group of teenagers, her voice filled with warmth. As Zoria observed from a distance, she noticed something strange. The atmosphere had shifted. The group of teenagers, who had been laughing only moments before, now looked tense. Zoria's sharp senses could feel the change in energy. They were on edge, their voices growing louder and more aggressive. Something wasn't right. Then she saw it. A group of men, similar to those she had witnessed the night before, emerged from the alley. They looked different, more dangerous, more violent. The girl and her friends were trapped. Without thinking, Zoria felt her body tense. This was the moment. She had no time to analyze, no time to hold back. Her mind raced, and before she knew it, her feet moved of their own accord. The gang advanced, but the young girl, noticing them, stood her ground. The girl's bravery reminded Zoria of the same man from the previous night, the one who had stood up to the gang, who had chosen courage over fear. Zoria had watched from the shadows then, uncertain if she should intervene. But now, seeing the girl surrounded, Zoria knew that there was no choice. In an instant, Zoria stepped out of her hiding place, her figure appearing seemingly out of nowhere. Her presence was overwhelming, like a storm that swept through the street. The gang members froze, their eyes widening as they saw her, realizing they were no longer alone. The girl's friends gasped, but the girl didn't flinch. She had seen Zoria, an unknown figure with an aura of quiet authority, and Zoria could sense her confusion. The girl didn't know who she was, but something in her expression told Zoria that she was ready to trust, even if she didn't fully understand what was happening. Zoria looked the gang leader in the eye. His expression was one of disbelief, his earlier arrogance replaced with uncertainty. The leader took a step back, sizing her up, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't sure if she was a threat, but Zoria could see the calculation in his gaze. He was trying to decide whether to continue with the attack or to retreat. With a voice that was both calm and firm, Zoria spoke. "You don't need to do this." The gang members laughed nervously, but Zoria's words carried a weight that stilled their laughter. She wasn't just speaking to them. She was speaking to something inside them. She could feel the hesitation, the uncertainty, and for a brief moment, the violence seemed to dissipate. The girl's friends, emboldened by Zoria's presence, began to gather closer. They didn't know who she was, but they could feel the same thing Zoria had felt when she had watched the man stand up the night before. This woman wasn't just standing there. She was offering a chance for something better. Zoria took a step forward, her stance calm but unwavering. Her power was not in force or violence, but in the presence she commanded. She didn't need to fight. She needed to remind them of the choices they still had. The leader hesitated again, unsure of how to react. And in that moment of indecision, the crowd began to grow. People emerged from the nearby shops and alleyways, their eyes now focused on the confrontation. One by one, they began to speak up, their voices growing louder. "Leave them alone. Get out of here." Zoria could see the shift. The gang, faced with this unexpected resistance, could no longer hold their ground. It wasn't just her power. It was the power of the people standing together, unwilling to let fear dictate their actions. The leader of the gang turned on his heel and signaled for his group to retreat. As the gang disappeared into the streets, Zoria's body relaxed, though her heart still raced. The girl and her friends were safe, but Zoria understood that something had changed in her too. For the first time, she had stepped in to protect someone, not out of necessity, but because it felt right. The young girl approached her cautiously, her face filled with curiosity. "Who are you?" Zoria smiled, though it was a rare and soft expression. "Just someone who was passing through." The girl stared at her, a mix of confusion and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Zoria nodded, then turned to leave. As she walked away, she felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She had always been an outsider, an observer, and yet today, she had taken an active role in changing the course of an event. It was an act of compassion, something she had never expected to witness on Earth, let alone be part of. Zoria's journey had only just begun, but now she knew one thing for certain. She could no longer stay hidden in the shadows. The human she had once feared had shown her that even in their darkest moments, they were capable of acts that transcended fear, capable of standing up for each other when it mattered most. And now Zoria was one of them, no longer an observer, but an active participant in a world she was only beginning to understand. The complexity of humanity. Zoria's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts as she walked through the streets, her eyes absorbing the scene around her. The previous day had shaken her. She had stepped in to protect a group of humans, not because she was ordered to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. The power she had witnessed in their unity was undeniable, and yet even in the midst of their strength, there were cracks, flickers of darkness that she couldn't ignore. As she moved deeper into the city, she saw more examples of humanity's dual nature. It was as if Earth itself was a mirror, reflecting every side of human existence. The kindness she had witnessed felt pure, but the world around her showed just as much cruelty and suffering. Zoria had never felt more confused. She passed by a man shouting in anger at a street vendor, demanding a product he had no intention of paying for. The man was red-faced, his words harsh and cruel. Zoria's eyes narrowed as she watched the vendor shrink back, clearly afraid. But then, as if in response to the aggression, a passerby intervened. "Hey, that's not how we treat people," the passerby said firmly. He stepped between the man and the vendor, blocking the aggressive figure. For a moment, there was silence, and the angry man hesitated. He looked around at the growing crowd, then muttered something under his breath and walked away. The vendor thanked the passerby, and Zoria stood in the shadows, witnessing yet another act of humanity she hadn't anticipated. Despite the cruelty that was so evident in the world, there was always someone who would step in to fight it. This was the complexity of humanity Zoria had come to understand. It wasn't just black and white. Humans weren't merely good or bad. There was a world of shades in between. They were capable of extraordinary acts of compassion, but at the same time, they could be selfish, violent, and broken. Zoria had seen both sides, and it made her question everything. What did it mean to be human? Zoria couldn't help but compare this to her own people. Her planet had once been united by a singular purpose, a singular vision. There had been no room for the contradictions she was now witnessing on Earth. Her kind had focused on perfection, on maintaining order and stability at any cost. But Earth was wild, untamed, a place where both light and dark coexisted in every soul. As she wandered, Zoria's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a cry. She turned quickly, her senses alert. A child, no older than 7, stood in the middle of the street, crying uncontrollably. The child's small hands clutched at their chest, and tears streamed down their face. Zoria approached cautiously, unsure of what had happened. A woman, seeing the child in distress, immediately rushed over to help. She knelt down beside the child and spoke softly, her words soothing, but her voice filled with concern. "What's wrong, little one? Are you lost?" The child looked up, panic in their eyes. "I can't find my mommy," they cried, their voice trembling. "I was just with her, but now she's gone." Without a second thought, the woman took the child's hand and pulled them close. "Don't worry, we'll find her. Stay with me." Zoria's heart ached as she watched the woman guide the child toward a nearby shop. The woman's actions were instinctive. There was no hesitation, no thought for her own safety or well-being. She simply saw a child in need, and she stepped in to offer comfort. As the woman disappeared into the crowd with the child, Zoria stood still, absorbing the moment. She had seen acts of compassion before, but there was something about this one that felt different. The woman didn't know the child, had no obligation to help, yet she acted without a second thought. It was as if the need to help, to protect, was ingrained in the very fabric of her being. Zoria had been so focused on the danger and violence humans were capable of, but now she saw something deeper. Compassion wasn't just a choice. It was a reflex, a deep-rooted part of humanity. The woman didn't act out of obligation or for any reward. She acted because she cared. For the first time since her arrival, Zoria understood the true complexity of humanity. Humans weren't simply driven by their need to survive. They were capable of more, of empathy, love, and sacrifice. They had flaws, deep wounds, and moments of darkness, but they were also capable of rising above it, of choosing to act for the greater good, even when it was difficult. This was the truth Zoria had been searching for. Humans were not perfect. They had their flaws, their moments of selfishness and violence, but they also had the capacity for incredible acts of selflessness and kindness. They were a contradiction, a balance of light and shadow that could never be understood in simple terms. Zoria's thoughts turned to her own people. In her homeworld, they had tried to eliminate the contradictions, to create a perfect society where everyone played their part without question. But Earth was a world of contradictions, of chaos, and yet, in that chaos, something beautiful existed. It was messy, unpredictable, and often painful, but it was real. Zoria realized that she had underestimated humans. They were not a simple puzzle to be solved. They were a complex, ever-evolving species, capable of growth, of change. She had seen the darkness, but she had also seen the light. And the light, she now knew, was worth protecting. As she continued her walk through the city, Zoria felt a shift inside her. She no longer saw herself as an outsider merely observing humanity. She was part of this world now, too. An unwilling participant, yes, but a participant nonetheless. She had seen enough to know that there was something in humans worth saving, worth understanding. And for the first time since arriving on Earth, Zoria felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just here to observe or judge. She was here to learn, to help, and to be part of this strange, beautiful, and broken world. Because in the end, that was what humanity truly was. Imperfect, unpredictable, but capable of extraordinary things. And she was determined to see it through, no matter where the journey took her. The test of compassion. The days stretched into weeks, and Zoria found herself increasingly caught in the web of human emotions. She had witnessed both their cruelty and their beauty, the darkness and the light that existed in every corner of the city. But today, something had changed. Something deeper was pulling her into the heart of Earth's turmoil. The city, once filled with the gentle hum of everyday life, now buzzed with tension. Rumors of a powerful warlord, a ruthless leader from a neighboring city, had begun to spread. His forces were said to be marching toward the heart of the city, aiming to take control and bring chaos to the already fragile world. Zoria could feel the fear in the air. People whispered about the coming storm, and the once hopeful smiles Zoria had witnessed in the past now seemed strained, replaced with anxious glances and hurried footsteps. Zoria's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Humans, she had learned, were resilient. They fought for survival, for love, and for each other. But what could they do against an enemy like this? The warlord was said to be ruthless, his army vast and merciless. The city had always been a place of conflict, but this felt different. This felt like a war that could tear everything apart. Zoria knew she had a choice. She had seen the way humans fought to protect one another, how they had stood together in the face of danger. She had already seen the kindness, the courage, and the unity that could bloom in the darkest of times. But could they survive something as powerful as the warlord? Could they hold on to the compassion she had seen in them when faced with such overwhelming odds? Zoria couldn't stay hidden any longer. She had already crossed the line from observer to participant. But today, her role would be tested in ways she had never imagined. The streets had become more crowded, the tension palpable. People moved quickly, boarding up their shops, gathering supplies, and preparing for the inevitable conflict. Zoria watched them from a distance, but this time, she couldn't just observe. Her feet moved of their own accord. And before she realized it, she was walking among them. She had to do something. As she turned a corner, her eyes locked onto a small group of humans gathered around a street corner. Their faces were grim, and the air between them was thick with fear. Zoria could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty, but there was something else too, something stronger. A woman stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "We need to fight back. If we don't, we'll lose everything." The man beside her nodded, his face hard with determination. "We can't just wait for them to come. We fight, or we fall." Zoria could hear the fear behind their words, but there was something more, a spark of defiance. This wasn't the same world she had seen before. The compassion was still there, but now it was intertwined with something else, something far more primal. The will to survive. Zoria didn't know if she was ready for this. She had seen humans fight, but not like this. This was not about kindness or love. It was about survival. It was about standing up to something far greater than themselves. Zoria didn't have the answers, but she knew that this moment would shape everything she had come to understand about humanity. Without thinking, she stepped forward and joined the group. Her sudden appearance caught their attention, and for a moment, they looked at her with confusion. But then the woman spoke again, her voice full of purpose. "Who are you?" she asked. Zoria didn't have an answer at first. She wasn't sure what to say. "I'm someone who believes in what you're doing," she finally said, her voice steady. "You don't have to fight alone." The words came out before she could stop them, but they felt true. These humans, who had once seemed so unpredictable, were now standing on the precipice of something much greater. And Zoria realized, in that moment, that they weren't alone. Not anymore. The woman didn't hesitate. She extended her hand to Zoria, and the others followed suit. "Then help us," she said. "We need every hand we can get." It wasn't the words that moved Zoria. It was the trust, the belief that they could stand together against the storm. And Zoria, for the first time, realized what it meant to be part of something bigger than herself. She had come to Earth as an outsider, but now she felt a connection that she couldn't ignore. These humans weren't perfect, but they were willing to fight for each other. That was something worth protecting. As they gathered their plans and prepared for the battle ahead, Zoria felt the weight of her decision. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was in it, right alongside them. She could no longer separate herself from the human experience. This was her test, too. The warlord's forces were coming, but Zoria wasn't afraid. She had seen the best and the worst of humanity, and now she knew that it wasn't about being perfect. It was about standing up when it mattered most. Compassion, courage, and the will to survive were all part of the same human spirit. And Zoria, for the first time, felt ready to be part of it. As night fell and the city prepared for the coming storm, Zoria looked around at the faces of those who had chosen to fight. They weren't warriors. They were ordinary people, driven by a belief that they could protect what they loved. The battle ahead would test them all, but Zoria knew one thing for sure. Humanity, for all its flaws, was capable of greatness, and she would stand with them, no matter what came next. A new beginning. The city had become a battlefield, though not in the way Zoria had expected. When the warlord's forces arrived, they brought with them an overwhelming force of destruction. It was chaos. Guns firing, explosions echoing in the distance, and a storm of smoke that covered the sky. Yet in the midst of it all, Zoria stood by the human she had come to know, fighting not just for survival, but for something greater, hope. As the first waves of the warlord's soldiers advanced, Zoria felt a surge of power within her. Her alien strength and speed were unmatched, but it wasn't her physical abilities that made the difference. It was something more. She had seen the depths of human compassion, their willingness to stand together, and now she understood that it was that very strength that would carry them through. She fought alongside them, side by side with those who had once been strangers. The woman who had spoken of fighting back now led the group with fierce determination, her voice calling orders and guiding others with precision. The teenagers, once unsure and afraid, had transformed into warriors in their own right, standing their ground and protecting one another. The community had come together, not just as individuals, but as a single force united in their purpose. Zoria had never experienced anything like it. The power of the human spirit was unlike anything she had seen in the stars. There was no fear of death, only a fierce drive to protect the people they loved. She saw people giving everything they had, even when the odds were stacked against them. And something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a spectator anymore. She was part of this battle, not just because of her strength, but because she believed in them. In the midst of the chaos, Zoria found herself thinking back to the first day she arrived on Earth. She had seen nothing but darkness, violence, and self-preservation. She had been ready to write off humans as a doomed species, destined to destroy each other. But now, in this moment, she saw something else, something far more powerful than she had ever imagined. There was a resilience in humanity, an ability to rise above fear, to fight for the greater good even when faced with overwhelming odds. As the warlord's forces pressed forward, the tide of battle began to shift. What had once seemed like an impossible fight was now becoming a story of survival and triumph. Zoria could see it in the eyes of the humans around her. There was no giving up. They had come too far, learned too much, and now they were fighting for something that was worth more than just survival. They were fighting for each other. In the heart of the city, as the final push came, Zoria made a decision. The battle was reaching its peak, and she knew that her actions could make the difference. She stepped forward, her presence unmistakable in the chaos. The warlord's forces were closing in, and for a brief moment, it seemed like they might succeed in breaking through. But Zoria was done hiding. She had spent so long watching, learning, and doubting. But now she was ready to act. She had seen the power of human compassion, and she was determined to stand with them, to protect what they had fought for. In a single moment of clarity, Zoria unleashed her full strength. The enemy faltered as her presence surged through the battlefield. With a series of swift movements, she disabled the warlord's most powerful soldiers, cutting through them with precision and grace. The humans, emboldened by her actions, rallied behind her, pushing back the invaders with renewed strength. It wasn't the alien power alone that turned the tide. It was the unity, the shared determination, and the willingness to fight for something greater than themselves. Zoria watched as the warlord's forces retreated, their morale shattered. The humans had won, not through brute force alone, but through their unity and the strength of their spirit. As the dust settled and the city began to recover, Zoria felt the weight of the moment. She had been an outsider, an observer, a skeptic. But now, she knew the truth. Humans were not defined by their flaws or their mistakes. They were defined by their ability to rise above, to stand together, and to protect what mattered most. The battle had been won, but Zoria knew that this was just the beginning. The humans had proven that they were capable of greatness, and in doing so, they had shown her that she, too, was capable of something more. She had come to Earth with the belief that she had all the answers, that she knew what it meant to be strong, to be a protector. But now she understood that true strength didn't come from power alone. It came from the heart, from the willingness to fight for what was right, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. Zoria stood in the heart of the city, surrounded by the humans she had come to care for. They had saved themselves, and in doing so, they had shown her a new way of looking at the world. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was part of this world. She had learned the true meaning of humanity, and it was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. As the sun began to rise over the city, Zoria looked at the faces around her. They were tired, battered, but alive. And for the first time, she felt a sense of peace. She had found her place, not as an outsider, but as a protector, someone who had learned to understand the complexities of the human spirit. The road ahead would be uncertain, but for the first time, Zoria was ready to walk it. She wasn't just here to observe anymore. She was here to stay.